I'm Camila, 28 years old, and right now, I'm staring at a piece of paper that feels like a slap across my face. It's a bill, a formal invoice, demanding $5,000 for adoption expenses. My adoptive family, the prestigious Reyes family, sent it to me just days after they deliberately excluded me from their annual Nochebuena gathering. The Reyes are one of Mexico City's oldest and wealthiest families, their name synonymous with power and tradition. I've always been the outsider, the quiet girl adopted from an orphanage in Oaxaca when I was just a baby. Despite their lavish home in Polanco, I never truly felt like I belonged. This year, the exclusion was particularly cruel. I saw photos on social media. My adoptive parents, my cousins, aunts, and uncles all gathered around a grand table, laughing, celebrating. Not a single call, not a single invitation for me. It was a clear, painful message. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself they were just busy, or perhaps it was an oversight. But deep down, I knew better. It was always like this, subtle slights, veiled comments about my different background, a constant reminder that I wasn't truly one of them. Then came the bill. $5,000. It wasn't just the amount, which was substantial for me, a freelance graphic designer. It was the audacity, the cold, calculated insult behind it. It felt like they were trying to put a price tag on my existence within their family. My hands trembled as I read the line again. Reimbursement for historical adoption-related administrative and legal fees. Historical? I'd been their daughter for 28 years. What kind of family sends their child a bill for being adopted? The ink on the paper seemed to mock me, a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the Mexican street life outside my window. The sounds of mariachi music drifting from a nearby plaza suddenly felt hollow, mocking my solitude. This wasn't just about money, it was about something far more sinister. I remembered my adoptive mother, Elena Reyes, always with that tight, polite smile that never reached her eyes. She'd often tell me, "Camila, we gave you a life of opportunity." But it always felt more like a transaction than a gift. My adoptive father, Ricardo, was even more distant. A man of few words, his silence often spoke volumes. He'd nod approvingly when I achieved something, but there was never genuine warmth, never the embrace of a true father. This bill, however, was a new low. It wasn't just a passive exclusion, it was an active expulsion, a final, brutal severing of ties. It felt like they were trying to erase me from their history, or at least make me pay for it. I couldn't just let this go. My pride, my sense of self, demanded answers. This wasn't just about $5,000. It was about the truth behind years of feeling inadequate, of being treated as a lesser member of a family that supposedly loved me. The air in my small apartment in Condesa suddenly felt heavy, charged with an unfamiliar resolve. I had to understand why. Why now? Why this bill? There was a hidden message here, a secret they desperately wanted to keep buried. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the contact for my adoptive parents. But then I stopped. A direct confrontation wouldn't work. They would deny everything, deflect, and probably just reiterate their demand for payment. No, this required a different approach. A quiet, methodical investigation. I needed to uncover the real reason behind this cruel act. The $5,000 was just the tip of an iceberg, and I was determined to find out what lay beneath. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and defiance. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every adopted child who ever felt like a burden, every person who was made to feel less than because of their origins. I wouldn't pay. I would fight. My first instinct was to call the family lawyer, a man named Jorge who had handled the Reyes affairs for decades. He was always cordial, but his voice on the phone was tight when I mentioned the bill. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, an administrative error. "Camila, my dear, I'm sure there's a simple explanation," he'd said, his tone dismissive. "Perhaps a clerical oversight. Just disregard it for now." But his words felt hollow, a practiced deflection. His discomfort was palpable, a tiny crack in the family's impenetrable facade. I pressed him, asking about the nature of these historical fees. He mumbled something about old records, distant relatives, and then quickly changed the subject, asking about my graphic design work. It was clear he wasn't going to help me. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit into an unsettling pattern. The subtle snubs, the way they'd introduce me as our adopted daughter, Camila, almost as an asterisk to their perfect family narrative. It was always there, simmering beneath the surface. I remembered a time when I was 10, and a distant aunt commented on my darker skin tone, saying I must take after my biological parents. Elena had quickly changed the subject, but the words had stung, leaving a lasting mark on my young mind. This wasn't just about money, it was about a deeper, ingrained prejudice. They were trying to quantify my difference, to make me pay for not being one of them by blood. The $5,000 felt like a symbolic payment for my very existence in their world. My next step was the adoption agency. It was a small, private one, long since closed down, but I found an old address in a dusty file. The building was now a trendy mezcal bar in Roma Norte, the irony not lost on me. The bar owner, a young man with tattoos and a kind smile, knew nothing of its past. "Before my time, Senora," he said, shrugging. "This place has been many things." Another dead end, another door closed in my face. Frustration began to bubble, but it was quickly replaced by a cold determination. If official channels were closed, I would have to find unofficial ones. I needed someone who knew the Reyes family, someone who might have seen behind their polished exterior. I thought of Maria, the Reyes' longtime housekeeper, who had practically raised me. She was a quiet woman, always observing, rarely speaking out of turn. She had retired a few years ago and moved back to her village in Hidalgo. Maria was a long shot, but she was my best hope. She had seen everything, heard everything, in that grand house. She knew the family's rhythms, their secrets, their unspoken rules. If anyone knew why I was truly an outsider, it was her. The bus ride to Hidalgo was long, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to rolling hills and agave fields. I clutched the bill in my hand, its crispness a constant reminder of my mission. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about unearthing a truth that had been buried for too long. As the bus rumbled on, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I was stepping into the unknown, chasing a ghost. But for the first time, I felt like I was truly fighting for myself, not just trying to fit into someone else's mold. The thought of facing Maria, of asking her to betray the family she had served for so long, filled me with trepidation. But the sting of the $5,000 bill and the years of subtle discrimination pushed me forward. I needed answers. The small village in Hidalgo was a world away from Mexico City's bustling streets. Roosters crowed, children played in dusty lanes, and the scent of wood smoke hung in the air. Finding Maria's modest home was easy. Everyone knew her. Maria, her face etched with the wisdom of years, greeted me with a surprised but warm embrace. She offered me a cup of atol, her eyes scanning my face with an unspoken understanding. It felt like coming home, a warmth I rarely felt in the Reyes mansion. I showed her the bill, explaining the Nochebuena exclusion. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them, shock, perhaps, or recognition. "They would do that," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She told me about the Reyes family's obsession with their lineage, their pure bloodline, how they valued appearances above all else, and how my adoption had always been a quiet point of contention, a blemish they had to explain away. "Your mother, Elena, she always worried about what people would say," Maria explained, stirring her atol. "About how it looked, adopting a child from outside." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. But Maria also hinted at something deeper, something beyond mere social prejudice. She mentioned a period of great trouble for the Reyes family around the time of my adoption, a scandal they had worked tirelessly to suppress. "There were whispers," she said, her voice dropping lower, about a business deal gone wrong, something with land, and a family disappeared. Her eyes darted around, as if afraid someone might overhear. She recalled strange visitors to the house, hushed conversations, and a palpable tension that permeated the grand rooms. It was all around the time I arrived, a tiny, silent infant in a house full of secrets. The $5,000 bill suddenly felt less like a random insult and more like a desperate attempt to sever a connection not just to me, but to something they wanted to bury with the past. Maria couldn't give me specifics, but she remembered a name, Señor Ramos. He was a lawyer, Not Jorge, but an older one who had handled the Reyes' most delicate affairs back then. He was known for making problems disappear. He was ruthless, Maria whispered, her hands clutching her rosary beads. And he knew everything. She didn't know if he was still alive, but she suggested checking old legal archives, perhaps in the city's central library. Leaving Maria's home, I felt a new surge of purpose. The bill was no longer just about me. It was a thread leading to a much larger, darker tapestry. The Reyes family's wealth, their pristine reputation, might be built on a foundation of lies. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Could my adoption be linked to this great trouble? Was I somehow connected to the scandal Maria hinted at? The idea was terrifying, yet exhilarating. I returned to Mexico City, the rural quiet replaced by the urban hum, my mind racing. The library, old legal archives, the name Señor Ramos, these were my new leads. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight. The Reyes family's silence, their dismissive attitude, now seemed less like indifference and more like fear. They were afraid of what I might uncover, afraid of the past catching up to them. And I was coming for it. Back in Mexico City, the search for Señor Ramos began. The Central Library's archives were a labyrinth of dusty files and forgotten histories. I spent days poring over old newspapers, legal journals, and public records from almost 3 decades ago. The name, Ramos, was common, but I was looking for a specific kind of lawyer, one connected to high-profile, discrete cases. The Reyes family's name appeared in social columns, but rarely in anything controversial. They were masters of maintaining their image. Then I found it. A small, almost overlooked article from a local paper, dated shortly after my birth. It mentioned a land dispute in Oaxaca, involving a powerful family and the displacement of several indigenous communities. The Reyes family was not directly named, but a shell corporation linked to them was. The lawyer representing the corporation? A certain Licenciado Ernesto Ramos. My heart pounded. This had to be him. The article was vague, but it hinted at questionable tactics and a swift, unfavorable resolution for the communities. I researched Ramos further. He was indeed known for his ruthless efficiency, his ability to make legal problems vanish. He had retired years ago, a recluse, living somewhere in the older, more secluded parts of the city, near Coyoacán. Finding his address was difficult, requiring a bit of old-fashioned detective work and a few discreet inquiries with retired legal clerks. The address led me to a grand, but dilapidated, colonial house, its walls covered in bougainvillea, its windows dark. I hesitated at the heavy wooden door. This was it, the man who held the key to the Reyes past, and perhaps to my own. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, but my resolve was stronger. I knocked. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of street vendors. I knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness. A frail, elderly man with sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his posture stooped, but his gaze was piercing. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "Señor Ramos, my name is Camila. I need to ask you about the Reyes family," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps suspicion, crossing his face. He tried to close the door, but I quickly inserted my foot. "It's about an old case, a land dispute in Oaxaca, and my adoption," I pressed, hoping the combination would pique his interest, or at least his fear. His hand trembled slightly on the doorknob. "I know nothing of such things," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked over my shoulder, as if expecting someone else. "You should leave. Now." The warning was clear, the fear in his eyes unmistakable. He knew something, and he was terrified. This wasn't just about a land dispute. It was about something far more dangerous. My own life might be at risk. Señor Ramos, despite his initial reluctance, eventually allowed me inside, his eyes constantly darting to the windows. The house was filled with old books, the air thick with dust and the scent of aged paper. He led me to a dimly lit study, cluttered with legal tomes. "The Reyes family is not to be trifled with, young lady," he warned, his voice a low growl. "They have long arms, and they prefer their secrets buried deep." He poured himself a glass of amber liquid, his hand shaking slightly. I showed him the $5,000 bill. He scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. A pittance. A final insult, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to make you disappear. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on me. They are afraid of you, Camila. He began to speak, his words painting a grim picture of the Reyes family's past. The land dispute in Oaxaca wasn't just a dispute, it was a forceful eviction, orchestrated by Ricardo Reyes to acquire valuable mining rights. They displaced an entire community, a small village that had lived on that land for generations, Ramos explained, his voice devoid of emotion. It was brutal, but legal, thanks to certain loopholes. He paused, a heavy silence filling the room. The villagers had resisted, and there had been a violent confrontation. Ramos hinted at casualties, though he wouldn't confirm details. The Reyes family wanted it swept under the rug. No witnesses, no lingering evidence. And then the bombshell. There was a young woman, a leader in the community, who vanished during the conflict, Ramos said, his gaze fixed on a point beyond me. She was pregnant. Her family searched for her, but she was never found. My blood ran cold. A pregnant woman vanished around the time of my birth in Oaxaca. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a horrifying mosaic. Could I be connected to this tragedy? Ramos didn't explicitly say it, but the implication was clear. The Reyes family might have been involved in more than just a land dispute. They might have been responsible for a disappearance, and perhaps for my very existence. Your adoption was unusual, he admitted, finally looking at me directly. It was arranged very quickly, very discreetly. No questions asked. Ricardo Reyes was insistent on a baby from Oaxaca, specifically from that region. The $5,000 bill wasn't just about my adoption. It was a desperate attempt to sever a connection to a dark past, a past they feared I might uncover. They wanted me gone, out of their lives, before I stumbled upon the truth. My adoptive parents weren't just prejudiced, they were complicit in something far more sinister. The life of luxury I had known was built on the suffering of others, perhaps even on a crime. My stomach churned. Ramos then showed me an old, faded photograph. It was a group of villagers, standing defiantly against a backdrop of barren land. In the center, a young woman, her face strong and determined, her eyes full of fire. She looked strikingly familiar. This was Elena, Ramos said, pointing to the woman. The one who disappeared. My breath caught in my throat. The woman in the photo had my eyes, my nose, a faint scar above her left eyebrow that I also had. This wasn't just a revelation, it was an earthquake. The woman in the photo, the vanished leader, was my biological mother. And the Reyes family, my adoptive family, were somehow involved in her disappearance. The photograph of Elena, my biological mother, burned in my mind. Her defiant spirit, so evident in her eyes, resonated deeply within me. The Reyes family hadn't just adopted me, they had taken me, perhaps to silence a truth, to erase a legacy. Ramos, seeing my shock, continued to speak, his voice now softer, almost regretful. The Reyes family's mining venture on that land was immensely profitable. But it came at a great cost. Elena was a formidable opponent, rallying her people. He explained that after her disappearance, the community's resistance crumbled. The land was seized, the mining operations began, and the Reyes family's fortune swelled. My adoption, he implied, was part of the cover-up, a way to control any future claims or revelations. They feared you, Camila, Ramos reiterated. Feared you would grow up and somehow discover the truth. The $5,000 bill is their final desperate act to push you away, to make you believe you owe them, rather than the other way around. He revealed that the adoption expenses were a coded message, a reference to a small, secret fund Ricardo Reyes had set up years ago. It was meant to be a final payment for the inconvenience of my existence, should I ever become a problem. The discrimination I had faced, the feeling of being an outsider, was not just about my adopted status or my origins. It was about guilt, about a constant, unspoken fear that I was a living reminder of their dark past. My adoptive parents, Elena and Ricardo, were not just cold and prejudiced, they were complicit in a crime. They had built their empire on the suffering of my biological family, and I was a pawn in their elaborate game of deception. I felt a surge of rage, cold and pure. All those years of trying to earn their approval, of feeling inadequate, were a cruel joke. They never wanted me to belong. They wanted me to be a secret, a silent shadow. Ramos then produced a sealed envelope from a hidden compartment in his desk. "I kept this for a day like this," he said, his voice strained. "It's a copy of a confidential report detailing the events in Oaxaca. Inside were detailed accounts of the eviction, witness testimonies, and even a police report that had been suppressed. It confirmed the violence, the disappearances, and the Reyes family's direct involvement. And then, a small handwritten note tucked among the official documents. It was from Elena, my biological mother, dated just days before her disappearance. It spoke of a secret meeting, a desperate plan to expose the Reyes family. The note mentioned a hidden will, a document that would transfer ownership of the land back to the community if anything happened to her. It was a last resort, a desperate act of defiance. My mind reeled. A will, a hidden document. This changed everything. The Reyes family hadn't just taken my mother's life. They had stolen her legacy, her fight for justice. The $5,000 bill, the exclusion, it was all a smokescreen. They weren't just trying to get rid of me. They were trying to prevent me from finding this will, from uncovering the ultimate truth that could dismantle their empire. Armed with Ramos's documents and the chilling truth about my biological mother, I knew I couldn't delay. The Reyes family had to be confronted. This wasn't just about my past. It was about justice for Elena and her community. I arranged a meeting at their Polanco mansion, feigning a desire to discuss the bill and clear the air. Ricardo and Elena Reyes agreed, their voices laced with an icy politeness that always masked their true intentions. The grand living room felt suffocating, the opulent decor now seeming grotesque. Elena Reyes sat across from me, her perfect posture and serene expression a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Ricardo stood by the fireplace, his gaze unreadable. "So, Camila, about this unfortunate bill," Elena began, her voice smooth as silk. "It seems there was a misunderstanding, a regrettable error." She waved a dismissive hand, as if the $5,000 was mere pocket change. "No misunderstanding," I countered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I understand perfectly. It's a bill for my existence, isn't it? A final payment to make me disappear, just like you made my mother disappear." Their faces froze. Elena's serene mask cracked, revealing a flash of fear. Ricardo's eyes, usually so impassive, widened in shock. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with unspoken truths. "What are you talking about?" Ricardo demanded, his voice suddenly sharp, devoid of its usual calm. "Your mother is Elena Reyes. We are your parents." His denial was immediate, but his body language betrayed him. I laid the faded photograph of my biological mother on the polished coffee table. "This is Elena, my biological mother. The woman you disappeared from Oaxaca. The woman whose land you stole." Silence. A deafening, terrifying silence. Elena Reyes gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ricardo's face turned ashen, his knuckles white as he gripped the mantelpiece. "They were trapped. We don't know what you're talking about," Elena finally whispered, her voice trembling. "This is a cruel fabrication. Who put these ideas in your head?" Her eyes darted to the door, a desperate look. "Señor Ramos," I stated, watching their reactions. "He kept records of the land dispute, the violence, and the note from my mother about a hidden will." Their composure completely shattered. Ricardo lunged forward, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen. "You little fool. You have no idea what you're meddling with." He reached for the documents, his intention clear, to destroy the evidence. I snatched them away, jumping back. "I know enough," I retorted, my voice ringing with newfound power. "I know you sent me that bill because you're terrified. Terrified I'd find out the truth." Just then, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder from behind. A burly man, one of Ricardo's security guards, had entered silently. My heart leaped into my throat. They weren't going to let me leave. "You've gone too far, Camila," Ricardo snarled, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this." The guard tightened his grip, pulling me towards the door, not the exit, but a darker, less visible one. But I had anticipated this. As the guard pulled me, I dropped a small, heavy object onto the marble floor. It was a recording device already transmitting. Every word, every threat was being captured. The guard dragged me towards a hidden door, but the sudden blare of sirens outside stopped him cold. Ricardo and Elena exchanged panicked glances. I had prepared for this, alerting a trusted contact beforehand. The police, responding to an anonymous tip about a disturbance and potential kidnapping, stormed the mansion. Ricardo, ever the master of appearances, quickly composed himself, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. I showed the officers the recording device and the documents Ramos had given me. The Reyes family's denials were weak, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence. The hidden will, mentioned in my biological mother's note, became the focus of the investigation. With the police involved and Ramos's detailed records, it didn't take long to find it, hidden in an old safe deposit box. The will was a masterpiece of defiance. It stipulated that if anything happened to Elena, the land in Oaxaca, along with a significant portion of the mining profits, would revert to the indigenous community she championed. But here was the truly astonishing twist, the ultimate surprise. The will also contained a clause about me. It stated that if Elena's child survived, that child, her heir, was to be placed in the care of a trusted relative, not adopted by outsiders. The Reyes family had intercepted me. They knew about the will, knew about my existence, and instead of allowing me to be raised by my true family and inherit my birthright, they had adopted me to control the narrative and keep the land and wealth for themselves. The $5,000 bill wasn't just for adoption expenses. It was a final, desperate attempt to pay me off, to sever the last thread connecting me to a legacy that threatened to expose their entire empire. It was a twisted final payment for their decades-long deception. The revelation sent shockwaves through Mexico City's elite. The Reyes family's reputation was shattered, their empire built on stolen land and a stolen identity. Ricardo and Elena faced legal charges, their power dissolving into public shame. For me, the truth was both devastating and liberating. I had lost a mother, a family, and a birthright, but I had gained something invaluable, my true identity and the strength to fight for it. The years of feeling like an outsider suddenly made sense. I didn't keep the money from the Reyes assets. Instead, I established a foundation in my biological mother's name, dedicated to supporting indigenous land rights and education in Oaxaca. It was a way to honor her legacy, to ensure her fight was not in vain. I visited the village in Oaxaca, the land now returned to its rightful owners. I met distant relatives, people who shared my features, my spirit. I found a sense of belonging I had never known, a connection to a heritage that was truly mine. The $5,000 bill, once a symbol of my exclusion, became a catalyst for my liberation. It forced me to dig, to question, to uncover a truth that not only freed me but brought justice to an entire community. My life now isn't about fitting into someone else's world. It's about building my own, rooted in truth, justice, and the powerful legacy of a mother I never knew, but whose spirit lives on in me. If you've ever felt like an outsider, like your worth was being questioned or priced, remember that sometimes the greatest rejections are actually the universe's way of pushing you towards your true path. Your value is inherent, not something to be built for.